Mutant Chronicles, Fiction, The Apostle of Insanity Trilogy, Volume 3, Dementia, by Michael A. Stackpole. Chapter 10. I engaged my modified navigation program, putting myself on cruise control, and headed for home. In some ways, I wished I could have become the cockroach I had been while subreal, because that way I could have climbed walls and moved between levels without using the normal modes of transport. Despite being back in my body, I really didn't feel terribly human. I knew Carl would have put that down to a conflict between Rex and the man who died to give him life, but I put it down to lingering bits of my Dark Legion counterpart lurking in my brain. Carl had surprised me toward the end of our interview. Once he reviewed the Dark Legion fugue, he took a more serious and commanding role in our relationship. He gave me orders instead of asking me probing questions. His change in attitude didn't make him any more correct in his thinking about me, but it did give me a window on his true depth, and that was enlightening. I'd not have expected him to notice my proficiency with a gun. I'd known it was there from my first waking moment as Rex. When I moved, I felt an absence of a weight on my body. I was compensating for it, and I thought at first that it came because of the long bone reductions that had been done on my body. That and connections with the computers, I decided were giving me phantom sensations. Then I strapped a gun on for the first time, with the weight of a bolter on my right hip, or my left arm, or at the small of my back. I felt a little bit more right. I felt more complete. I felt more myself. The problem was that the myself I felt wasn't me. It was the dead guy, not Rex. The dead guy clearly had been a crack shot. He had been able to handle himself under fire. But what did that get him? Had he believed himself invulnerable because of the pistol he wore? Had the false sense of security doomed him? Had he focused on his gun too much to be able to react well in some final situation? I had no specific answer for any of those questions, but I had a general one. The guy with the gun was history. I had decided, therefore, any dependence on a gun would be history too. I chose more personal methods of defending myself. I wove Aikido, Karate, and Keupso Chirigi, and a host of knife-fighting techniques together into my personal self-defense system. Along with the extra power and extra speed that Cybertronic's alterations of my body had provided, these skills made certain I'd not be vulnerable to whatever had slain me. My stomach growled, and it wasn't from nerves. I stopped at a Casa Shogun kiosk and studied a menu that I already knew by heart. Deciding I would eat while I continued walking home, I purchased a cup of miso soup and a soy burrito. Once I had the food in hand, I found it less appetizing than it had appeared on the menu. But that was normal, and I appreciated the injection of some normality into my life. Walking along, it seemed to me that Carl had missed one point that disturbed me in my encounter with the two Inquisitors, in ways that made rendering them useless as raw materials for Andy. He may have been right in case of the younger man, but not so in the other case. I'd hidden that body and delayed reporting, not because I didn't want the man made into a chasseur. I didn't care what happened to him. I wanted to figure out what was happening to me. I never should have killed the younger man. Had I been asked to gauge my response to that sort of situation before, I'd have said that I'd have knocked him out and then gotten him some help. Cybertronic help, or otherwise. But I hadn't done that. I just put the gun to his head and blew his brains out. Granted, the man had tried to kill me, so he had unilaterally escalated our relationship into the realm of lethal play. But that didn't mean he deserved to die, or that I had to kill him. something in me had been worn down. I would have said it had broken, but the revulsion I felt at the killing told me that it had not. Whatever internal break I had against the murder had been circumvented in that case, and I could only point to one thing that caused it to cut out. The fugue. The creature I had been would have murdered the Inquisitor as easily as I did. To that kind of mind, to an apostle's mind, the man would have been insignificant. He would have been less than that. Killing him would have been like folks on old Earth who used to kill and mount butterflies, creating memento mori because of the pleasure of viewing what they had once been. What struck me as horrible was that I could understand the devaluation of life from the collector's point of view. What did snuffing the spark of life in an insect mean? What was the significance of its death? Could it be that the butterfly's only purpose in existence was to leave a beautiful carcass? For many people, the value of life was relative. Their own life was priceless, but any other life was open to negotiation and sale to the highest bidder. As a human, I protested that human life was somehow different. The fact that an apostle might be as far above me as I was above a butterfly did not justify my death. Worse yet, oddly enough, was the idea that my life might be seen as nothing more than a waste of time before my death could give a dark apostle pleasure. It was perverted and evil. The obvious argument is that man is sapient and an insect is not. But is not the test for sapience relative? By the time man had decided that dolphins and whales were truly sapient, we had ruined the oceans in which they lived, had destroyed their food supplies, and had trapped the luckless survivors in small pens with insufficient numbers of them to maintain a viable colony. For all I knew, butterflies, back when they and flowers still existed in our solar system, had some sort of communication with others of their number, perhaps in choosing which type of plant to pollinate. Butterflies were making some sort of political statement. Perhaps they fought their wars by encouraging the propagation of plants that would push out the plants fertilized by a rival butterfly corporation. Perhaps their form of communication was one so sophisticated we could not understand it. Carl has suggested my fugue state came about when spare thoughts leaked from the brain of a dark apostle, clearly imbuing them with psychic powers like telepathy. Could it be that butterflies had the ability to communicate that way? Could it be that at any time I started to daydream, I was picking up a stray thought from a butterfly or a cockroach or some other creature on Luna that I would not have credited with sapience? Or could my confusion have to do with nothing more sinister than picking up stray thoughts from my own ghost? In defending myself, I had begun to act as Rex, but as soon as I picked up the Punisher, I was the old me. Could I have been someone who was so callous that I would have willfully and remorselessly killed a helpless man? And if I was, am I not better off being Rex? I arrived home and slumped down in my chair in front of the entertainment monitor with those same thoughts running around in my brain. As the navigation program performed its last checks on the surroundings, I finished my burrito and drained the last of the miso from the plast-formed cup. I tossed it into the wastebasket, then picked up my remote control, brought the entertainment monitor to life, and started the first disc in my viewer spinning. The navigator shut off as the first pictures came up, and once again became a ghostly voyeur at my own funeral. Everyone there appeared well-heeled and quite mannerly. The turnout was good. I'd have preferred standing room only, with thousands of mourners outside, but filling 47 of an available 55 seats can't be taken as bad. Some people even seemed to be genuinely upset. Would they have been upset at the passing of a stone-cold killer? I settled myself back into my chair, and an unconscious grin spread across my face as a man in the front row got up and headed forward to deliver my eulogy. He paused for a second in front of the small black lozenge-shaped chest, holding my ashes, and lowered his head respectfully. He said something, but I couldn't make it out, even going surreal with the video, which I had done many times before but didn't do now. I couldn't decipher what the man said. I decided that emotion had choked him, so the words had never been vocalized. It might not have been true, and hatred could have done it as easily as love, but I took comfort in that illusion. And after all, isn't that what funerals are for? Comforting the living? It impressed me that the man drew notes from his pocket, then set them aside before beginning to speak. Thank you all for coming here this evening. I see so many of you that deleted, knew, and loved. Knowing that he meant as much to you as you did to him would have been a great comfort to him. Having known him all my life, I have as hard a time as you do trying to come to grips with the fact that he is gone. He may not be alive in body, but he must live on in our memories. Something began to itch in my brain. As I watched the video, I heard the eulogy dozens of times, but it was different this time. I couldn't figure out why exactly, but I had an inkling that I recognized something more in the voice. I commanded the computer to check the speaker's voice print against the voices of everyone I'd come into contact with in the past week. He'd barely gotten into his first recollection about me when the computer came up with a match. Mr. Steele, from the capital interrogation of Lorraine Coven. I immediately froze the video, then backed it to a good face-front shot of the man. Isolating him from the background, I flipped the video over to the infrared track and ordered the computer to compare that image with the one of Steele from the interrogation. Click. The faces matched on 37 of 40 points, and the mismatches concerned the length of his hair. The man delivering my eulogy worked for Capital, and must have been high enough up in the corporate structure to be trusted with a lot of information. Recalling the interrogation, I remembered how he had ordered the lawyer, Campbell, out of the room, and how he had misled the doctor into believing Lorraine was hallucinating. That meant he knew enough to be able to obscure what the truth was. In Lorraine's case, I knew from Yojimbo and Ragathol that what Lorraine had described must have been what truly happened to Fairview. The fact that Steele painted everything she said as delirium meant he knew it was true and wanted to limit the spread of that information. In an instant, I stopped the video viewer from actually displaying the rest of the funeral. I had the viewer download the entire disk's IR track to my computer. Then I made the computer run a check against the faces of everyone who attended. I wanted to see if Lorraine Coven had been there. Somehow, it had become important to me that she had been. By the time it took me to remember that Steele had said she'd lived her whole life on Venus, the computer completed its search. I almost didn't ask for the results, because I knew she could not have been there, and that the computer would show me every face in the video and describe in turn how each one compared to Lorraine's face. Any face with 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth, and a forehead would match on 5 points. So the recital took some time. I decided to endure it anyway. It would give me something to do while waiting for hunger or Ragathol. Click. The first face, that of a 30-year-old woman, matched on 28 of 40 points. A 20-point match would have made them cousins, and 28 meant they were siblings. The next two, an older man and woman, hit on 15 and 17 respectively, making them her parents, or possibly one pair of grandparents. I hadn't found Lorraine Coven, but I had found her family. I had the computer pull back and give me the real faces to go beside the IR images. Then I pulled the image I had of Lorraine and had the computer create for me a colorless face template. From her sister, I took flesh tones and filled in the skin. I was going to take the sister's blonde hair, but I noticed some darker roots. Their color matched Lorraine's father's brown hair, so I filled in her shoulder-length hair's outline with dark mahogany. Oddly enough, her father had bright blue eyes, and her mother had dark brown. They combined in the sister for a nice hazel, and I used that to color Lorraine's eyes in. Something inside me clicked, and it wasn't the computer. Lorraine's face, now with color, was still devoid of life. But still devoid of life looked familiar. Discarding the parents, I had the computer scan the sisters' movements during the funeral and used that to animate Lorraine's face. The eyes still had no spark in them, and the mannerisms appeared a bit stiff for her, but they were close. I knew her. It was more than just seeing a face that is vaguely common and deciding you've seen people who look like that before. The impression I had was intangible, but nonetheless real to me. I had known her. I don't think we had been lovers or even that close, but it was something more than what Miss Wickersham and I had. Closer to what Andy and I had, but not that intimate. I was comfortable around her and relaxed. At that point, I almost blew Carl's injunction against going subreal because I wanted to tag Lorraine's family with names. I hesitated before doing that, and instead had the computer pull back and show me the sister and parents in context. The computer went back to the first occurrence of the woman in the video and placed her sitting next to Steele. As the image tightened in on them and masked everything but the two of them out, I saw they were holding hands, right up until Steele got up to eulogize me. I sat in my chair and shivered. Carl had assigned me the mission of covering Lorraine's identity confirmation because he knew I had known her and Steele. Steele should have known Lorraine. Perhaps he had been covering his recognition just to keep the doctor from wondering about any connection between them. The presence of both of them in one room meant Carl had hoped seeing and hearing them again would help me break through and reconcile my two halves. At least that was one explanation, but it didn't have to be the only one, or all of the explanation. Perhaps Carl wanted to motivate me to work against the Dark Legion by showing how they hurt someone I had known. He might have even known about fugues before I became aware of them. Ultimately, it struck me, Carl's reasons for assigning me the mission were immaterial, and I'd felt I'd used up my coincidence supply, suffering a fugue in the company of folks who understood something I mumbled because of it. As Carl had been describing the cartel and its reluctance to take action against the Dark Legion, I'd felt impatient to do something. The cartel be damned. I knew where they had Lorraine Coven, and I knew Ragathol was going to try to take her. I could get Pam and Lane and their people to be there to forestall Ragathol's effort. Hang on, Lorraine, I growled. Ragathol may think of you as a prize, but you're not one he's going to get. Intent on heading out to gather troops to protect Lorraine, I got out of my chair. I made it as far as standing upright when the fugue hit me. I continued forward and was gone long before I kissed the carpet. Mutant Chronicles, Fiction, The Apostle of Insanity Trilogy, Volume 3, Dementia, by Michael A. Stackpole. Chapter 10, End.